and welcome to this week's episode of African News Review. And again, I'm your host, Adesoji Iginla, and with me as usual, we have guests, incredible gentlemen, journalists, publisher, Black Star News on WBAI, author of the book Manufacturing Hate, which I enjoin you to actually buy. And he's none other than Comrade Milton Allimadi. Welcome again.
Asante sana. Asante do. Thank you.
Yes. So this week we have a powerful theme running through all the stories we're about to run. And we've titled it Africa's Past Collides with the Present, the enduring legacy of imperialistic exploitation, both human and material, and how it continues to shape the continent's identity and geopolitical relationships. And so for the first story, we go to Benin Republic, who has decided, I shall share, it's from the AP and it's titled Benin Grants Citizenship to Slave Descendants as it faces its own role in the trade. That's a bit problematic, but I would, let's start. So it's the piece is filed in from Dakar, Senegal. When Undage Anelka first came to the West African country of Benin from her home island of Martinique, a French overseas territory in the Caribbean, the 57-year-old travel agent said she had a feeling of déjà vu. I quote, "A lot of people reminded me of my grandparents, the way they wore their headscarves, their mannerisms, and their mentality," she said. Feeling at home in Benin, Anelka decided to settle there last July and open a travel agency. She hopes to become a citizen by taking advantage of a law passed in September that grants citizenship to those who can trace their lineage to the slave trade. The new law, which was initiated by President Paris Talon, who had been in office since 2016, is part of a broader effort by Benin to reckon with its own historical role in the slave trade. The law is open to all over 18s who do not already hold other African citizenship and can provide proof that an ancestor was deported via the trace slave trade from anywhere in sub-Saharan Africa. Benin's authorities accept DNA tests and authenticated testimonies and family records. Your initial thoughts?
All right. So, I mean, it's better than not having a policy, right?
Yep.
Or a right of return. But I think what we need to have actually is, rather than having individual countries, and then you're going to have 50 plus stories about what policy do they have, there should be an African Union policy. And that would just, resolve all these issues once and for all. Because obviously preferable would be not to have somebody have to do a DNA test. Obviously every African, whatever they are around the world, came from Africa, right?
True. Yeah.
So they don't need a DNA. I can understand that the logic behind that is that they would be overwhelmed. They would not be able to cope if they made it open policy because they don't have the resources, you see? So that I can understand. So that's why I'm saying, if it's an African Union policy, every member of the African Union abides by it, and every country has a quota, correct?
Correct, yep.
So let's say we have 50 plus countries, right? And each one of them has a certain number that they're going to automatically admit every year. Then that's a substantial number of people, you see? Then the burden would not fall on any one or two or three African countries who are the ones, there are few that have relatively progressive policies in terms of right to return compared to others. But if we make all of them sign up to such a policy, then we won't have these issues at all. You would not have to have an African country telling another African whose descendant was taken somewhere forcefully to have to prove that they came from that particular part of Africa. After all, all those maps were drawn by the Europeans.
True.
You see? So that would be my suggestion.
Okay.
In terms of how the framing is beginning, you can tell they want to, at the end of the day, they want to argue that this enslavement was actually a two-way street. You had the European slavers on the one hand, and you had the African counterparts on the other hand. Well, that's misleading. If you read how Europe underdeveloped Africa, Rodney explains clearly that there were some collaborators, but the majority were people who resisted, people who fought for years, people like Queen Zinga. And many of the leaders on the west coast of Africa actually fought, for years, including in Benin itself. Right? It wasn't like there was one king in Benin, in what is now modern Benin. So there were some who fought for many years. There were some who fought, were defeated, and then became collaborators. Then, of course, there were some that just were collaborators and were even, and the ones that resisted even fought those collaborators. So the story, without elaborating, it makes it appear as if it was a willing buyer and willing seller.
Okay.
Pure and simple. No, that's misleading.
So there's this language here, which it says, the law is open to all over 18s who do not already hold other African citizenship and can provide proof that an ancestor was deported. What sort of language is that?
Well, first of all, think about it. An ancestor was deported. I mean, it's amazing. Who are the people who write these things,
Okay, I can provide you names. This was filed in by Mark Bacheriel. So by the look of his name, I can tell he's French.
No, but even forget him, this editor, think about it. Yeah, they're walking you slowly because it's a progressive thing. It's not done in one article. So once you don't critique this one, the next one will contain more germs, And then the third one would have even more contamination until you're persuaded that, in fact, it was the African leaders, the kings and the chiefs, who were actually promoting and inviting Europeans to come so they could sell fellow Africans to them,
There is a part I want you to hone in on, and I did highlight it. Okay, so that's one of the monuments in Alabama, the African town, and made more famous by Zora Neale Hurston's book, The Barracoon, that centered the story of Koshola. It says, Benin is not the first country to grant citizenship to the descendants of slaves. It should be enslaved, actually. Earlier this month, Ghana naturalized 524 African Americans after the West African country's president, Nana Akufo-Addo, invited them to come home. In 2019, as part of the 400-year anniversary of the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in North Africa. Okay, but Benin's citizenship carries added significance, in part because of the role it played in the transatlantic slave trade as one of the main ports of departure. European merchants deported an estimated 1.5 million. So when I was reading it, that word just kept jumping up. What do you mean? Go on.
Right. Well, obviously, they don't want to say kidnap. They don't want to say kidnap, and that's why they're saying deported. And when it comes to the European part, you have to sanitize it a little bit. You can't have European and kidnap in the same sentence, You can't have European and terrorism That's what it was. Enslavement was terrorism on the same sentence. So yeah, it's deportation. Oh, by the way, your visa is expired. It's time for you to get on the slave ship, you know. Remarkable. No, I hope our people pick up on these subtleties. These subtleties allow you to surrender your ability to be critical. And that, as I say, they keep increasing the dose of the poison progressively with each article.
Okay. One more question. So what do you think in terms, okay, fine, the idea of the return is welcomed. How do you think this Benin's citizenship law addresses historical injustice? I mean, you've talked to some of the limitations, but in the grand scheme of things, to Benin Republic itself, how do you think this right to return plays into its growth as a country and as a way of restorative justice for the enslaved?
Well, in potentially in many ways, as you know, our sisters and brothers in what they used to call the so-called New World, many reside and work in countries that have relatively much more advanced economies compared to the economies of every African country.
True.
So if this was used in a strategic way, it could actually become a better way of economic development. Rather, it's even much better than borrowing money from the World Bank and the IMF. They give you the money, then they say, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this with the money. And in order to give the money, you have to cut spending on medical care, on hospitals, on healthcare, cut spending on education, cut spending on fuel subsidy, cut spending on food subsidy. Then we'll give you the money. And that's how we give the money. You cannot industrialize. You cannot start manufacturing industrial products from factories and take away money that should be going to Western companies that export to your country. But if you have a comprehensive policy like this, you will actually go around the world. Come to the United States, for example, and say the richest, most affluent sisters and brothers of this country, 1,000 of you, right? I want 50 of you to come and take citizenship. And these are the special privileges you will get. And then, of course, I have another quota reserved by income bracket to ordinary working people, sisters and brothers in the United States. Take up citizenship too. Now you, with the ones with resources, I want you to invest in the new industrial zone that I'm establishing, right?
Yeah.
Give it a Pan-African name that resonates with somebody that's coming back.
Okay.
You see? You know, I think the right of return is a bit too simplistic. Need something that captures our African history and essence. And you set up those industrial zones. And you start manufacturing. Come here and let's build factories. Let's use our resources and start exporting. You have the capital. We don't. We have the resources. We don't expect you to come and give us the same conditions that the World Bank and IMF give us, because you will be coming as a citizen, actually, of my country. We have to think outside the box. And we are squandering many opportunities. This is just one example. So imagine if every African country adopted a policy like the one I just suggested, right? You would not need any money from the World Bank and IMF.
And you also be coming with other advantages that, you know, say, for instance, the United States, no one can interfere with their business activities anywhere in the world. So if they're coming, basically they've brought their own shield with them, legal shield. So it's an advantage, and it's also a win-win situation for everyone.
Absolutely. So win-win-win.
Yes. Okay. So that said, we pivot to outside the continent, to the Indian Ocean, and we go to the island Unfortunately, we have to call it that, the French territory of Mayotte. And
it's not French territory, actually, it's French occupied. Because, we are the ones that are in the business of changing the perception of our people from the colonial mind frame,
mindset,
right?
Yeah.
They can say anything they want, but it's up to us to correct them and say the correct things. And that's why we have this show. How can France have any territory in Africa? Think about it. Which Senegalese territory is next to France? An island off of France. Imagine. It would be like, oh, the Zimbabwean territory of, whatever you call it. Le territory, whatever you call it, right? It's absolute nonsense. Yeah. And we have to start thinking that way before we even go into the particulars. As African people, we have to reframe everything. And Benin is asking for DNA testing. That's so Eurocentric, right?
True.
Because they're imbibing Eurocentric literature, Eurocentric ideas, Eurocentric thought processes. We have to be very disruptive, right? And say, why should they have the right to frame the parameters of the conversation, you see?
Okay. Taking that as a cue, we read this, and it's a news story in the New York Times. It's titled "Cyclone on French Archipelago exposes resentment over immigrants." Again, another Eurocentric argument.
Right. So the headline writer, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, cannot even think
how bizarre
relate to anything I just said over the last 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
To him, there's nothing wrong with referring to it as a French
archipelago
in Africa. You see? But hopefully one of them will listen to our conversation and say, you know what?
They have a point.
They have a point. Why should it be that way? Just because the French say it doesn't mean you have to accept it as well. You see?
Okay. I go on. So, in the ruins left by Cyclone Chido, people from Mayotte, off the eastern coast of Africa, are calling to deport the undocumented immigrants who have settled there from the neighboring islands. Proceed further. After a vicious cyclone this month raised slums housing many undocumented immigrants on the French island territory of Mayotte, Safina Saliu did not shed a tear. As leader of an advocacy organization representing people from Mayotte, Ms. Sula staunchly supported an operation that the French authorities started last year to destroy the slums and deport undocumented immigrants, most of whom came from nearby Comoro Islands. She hailed the cyclone as a divine Washubushu, using the name of the slum clearance operation, and added now the state must react quickly and forbid the reconstruction of these shanty towns. Initial thoughts before I even proceed further.
Okay. Thank you so much for reading that part, right? And it shows you how depraved the logic is, and how on the other side, our thinking is also so depraved that not enough of us would be outraged by this type of, story, right?
Yep.
So the guy or the lady, I don't know who wrote it, whether it's a man or woman, wrote this article.
Let's go back quickly. Go back. It's written by John Elligon and Julia Bodine.
Okay. So they're saying Mayotte is off the eastern coast of Africa.
Yep.
They're acknowledging that it's in Africa.
Truth be told.
But they're not questioning why are they referred to as French, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they're talking about undocumented immigrants. You know, so how can Africans be undocumented immigrants in Africa, you know? See, these are the kind of questions that we need to pose and get our people to start thinking that way, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Before the French occupation that continues up today, at least in the part that is Mayotte. And I'm sure you can go back and trace ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll find that every family in Mayotte has somebody who comes from Comoros.
Comoros. Yep.
And vice versa. You see?
Mm-hmm.
So now we are letting that old divide and rule continue to be practiced, right?
Yep.
Just like those border lines that we've discussed all across the mainland of the African continent.
Correct.
Dividing families, dividing sisters and brothers, dividing cousins, right?
Yep.
Where you have the same family living on opposite sides. So in Uganda at one time, there was a minister in the government. His last name was Agre Awori. And he had literally a brother, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who was at one point a vice president, I believe, in Kenya, with a last name Awori as well.
Okay.
You know, literally the same family, just separated by that borderline. So if the Awori of Kenya had come into Uganda without a quote unquote visa, he would have been an
illegal
undocumented in Uganda, where his brother is a minister. See how preposterous it is?
I mean, I can even go further. The dividing line between Tanzania and I believe Kenya is a river. And there are Maasais on both sides of the river.
Think about that, right? Absolutely. The Maasai, the best example. Yeah, thank you.
Now, so imagine that. Undocumented.
It's nonsense because, you know, we really, really have to go to the borderless Africa. It's not a concept. It now has to be made a reality. You know, it is. And of course, it means we have to resist the narrative because they're spreading this narrative to keep Africa divided.
True.
You see?
Remember South Africa.
It's a big narrative in South Africa right now because South Africa could be the engine to grow the entire Southern Africa region and the continent.
Yeah.
Right?
It was also the main subject during the recent elections in Botswana.
Absolutely. You see? And I'm afraid the current crop of African leaders we have, many of them don't rise to the occasion. They don't see this. They don't realize the purpose behind these types of stories. Why is the New York Times going all the way to that tiny island? What's the population?
Not more than 400,000.
Think about that. And you said there were two writers on this article, right?
Yeah, two writers, yeah.
Okay, so let's continue. Let's sample a little more, and you'll see there's an agenda behind.
Okay, so
these. You know, they just didn't see images of people in Mayotte. So, wow, they must be pissed at these immigrants. Let's go and do a story about it.
So it goes on.
It's not right next door. It's a long way to send two correspondents, right? So you must be thinking like that as well.
True. And it's a very important story that needs international attention.
Absolutely.
Many Maoris, as locals are known, have long blamed the immigrants for committing crimes and straining resources. Sounds familiar? Mayotte, where nearly 80% of the residents live in poverty, is the poorest place in France.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So now, you see where, how many paragraphs down before that information is revealed?
So that would be, let's count. Okay, so that's the first opening. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. The fourth paragraph in.
Very good. So now, and the story could have actually been planted by some clever French public relations person, a publicist. It's possible. So now the lead of the story, we should be on the top, that after, I don't know how long the colonial agenda in Mayotte has been, let's say since the Berlin Conference, right?
Yep.
Since 1885. Up to date, 80% of the population
live in poverty.
Of Mayotte live in impoverishment. Number one, you don't need any better example of the failure of colonialism, right? Number two, you don't need any better example of the failure of the racism behind colonialism. Is it really a coincidence that the most impoverished part, quote unquote, of France is inhabited by Africans? So why is that not the story? Why is that not the headline and the substance of the story? Instead, we see this nonsense about undocumented. Really? Unbelievable. It's one of perhaps the most preposterous articles. But it's good to have the ones that are most preposterous, because once our audience gets used to analyzing this one, it's easier to critique and analyze the others.
True. I would read one other part. Okay. The people of Mayotte and Comoros shared a common ancestry. However, in a decisive referendum in 1974, Mayotte was the only part of the Comoros archipelago that voted to remain part of France. In recent years, people on Mayotte have attacked the homes of immigrants and stood in front of hospitals and immigration office to block immigrants from entering. Mahorians have voted in large numbers for far-right nationalist politicians who have lobbied for tougher immigration laws specific to Mayotte. Among their demands is ending birthright citizenship for children born to non-French parents on the islands. That sounds like mainstream.
No. Really, it's very sick and saddening that an editor. What publication is this?
This is the New York Times.
All right, so it's so sad that an editor or editors sitting there and would see nothing wrong with this article because they presume we're just, a bunch of fools as African people. So you are sitting here telling us that this is the most impoverished part of quote unquote France, right? Inhabited by Africans, right?
Yep.
And because other Africans are coming from other parts that are even much more impoverished, you're implying by getting quotes from people, and they'll say it, of course, that colonialism was actually better. And you folks in Comoros made a mistake to vote to end that relationship. You are, in fact, endorsing the French colonialism and racism and impoverishment of both Mayotte and the people of Comoro, who are now coming to Mayotte at the same time. A mind-boggling, very condescending, and I might suggest actually racist article. Racist because they don't even see the aspects that we are critiquing now and analyzing.
Oh, they probably gave themselves a pat on the back that they filed a
Exactly.
story.
Absolutely. You know, the worst type, this is even worse than when people use the N word openly. Because that one you don't have to critique, it's not hidden, you see? But this one, where nobody sees the implications the way we're breaking it down, they start saying, look at these bad people of Komoro. You had an opportunity to vote yes to colonialism. You voted no, and now you're coming here to our hospitals. Oh, man, it doesn't get more sick than that. Really, yeah.
There was a question
Sometimes
I wrote down.
people, they're too clever for their own good, man.
There was a question I actually wrote here with regards, the story is so racist that we forgot that this is the aftermath of a natural disaster. And the reason I actually honed in on it was because it reminded me of the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in 2005.
Yes.
It exposes the underbelly of what problem that society has. And in this case, in the last one, you got
thank you
West.
for that comparison. I appreciate that. Yeah. That's very apt, very appropriate. Absolutely. As you call from Katrina, there was the element of class, element of race. Who are the ones who are getting assistance immediately? Who are the ones who are being rescued? There are many reports that African people, aka African Americans, were being ignored, even though they were being seen and needed rescue. So I agree. There's that analogy.
So the question I ask in regards to that would be, you have global warming being an issue.
Yes, of course.
You have series of
that could have been even the headline of the article right there.
Exactly.
You have series of consequences and the price that Africans pay, even though they are not contributing literally anything to global warming. But they're bearing the brunt, the cost of the pollution being emitted by the industrialized countries. So that could have been another angle, in fact.
But they've opted for the usual racist tropes and what have you, which is convenient, shall we say. But
you know what? At the same time, and this is obviously a discussion for another episode, I think what the election in the U.S. has shown is that the so-called legacy media, they keep talking about, how Trump was a threat to democracy, right? And of course, the question is, whose democracy, right? Are you referring to?
What sort of democracy?
Exactly. But at the same time, they're not able to self-critique. What does it say about us, right? For example, back in the day when the New York Times would endorse a candidate, that was considered like, ground shifting, right?
Yep.
Price make, right? Apparently, that is no longer the case, right? And then you have, and it was actually sad to see the discussion of the election night on MSNBC, on CNN, outlets like that, when it dawned on the anchors that Trump was going to win. They could not even hide their facial expression. You see, it was difficult for them to continue the evening. One can go back and look at their coverage on election night when it first started. Look at their features, and then compare, and then freeze it, and then compare later on when the numbers started indicating. Right. And why am I saying all this? Because they actually, of course, rightly so, did not want Trump to win.
Okay.
And a decent person would not want Trump to win either.
Okay.
You know, obviously, I did not want Trump to win. But at the same time, they're not able to see that they are also part of the problem.
Mm.
The legacy corporate media, you see, they are part of the elite. Anchors paid millions of dollars, you know, producers millions of dollars. So they're not in touch with what is going on the ground.
Mm.
So many of the Trump supporters were probably not shocked that he won because they knew what was going on in the ground, but not the elite media, because the elite media do not cover them from their perspective. So you're telling me that when the elite media went to Mayotte, they were not able to find anybody with a different perspective. They were not able in that whole island to find somebody who's saying, wait a minute, this is the poor fighting the poor while the elite are just watching. This is not the question you should be asking. The question you should be asking is, why
is this the case?
Is 80% of the population impoverished? And it's the most impoverished part of the so-called Great France. Why? Let the French officials answer that. Macron is here. Let him answer that, right?
Mm.
I'm telling you. But at the same time, that's why a lot of people are now shifting to independently produced media, including productions such as the one we are having our discussion on right now.
Yep.
People are looking for the missing pieces, and they're realizing the legacy media with all their resources, they're not delivering it. And that is why now you have MSNBC telling many of their elite anchors to take a pay cut, as much as a 50% pay cut.
Because they know the numbers don't lie.
Absolutely. And it will continue like that. It's not a question of the anchor. It's not a question, it's a question of, are you really covering the stories on the ground? How many times do you see them covering stories of impoverished working people who need 3 incomes just to survive? That's not a sexy enough story. You know, if you go back and you analyze the content, oh, Trump did this, oh, Trump did that, oh, Trump did this, oh, Trump did that. And yes, he was doing a lot of these egregious things. But are you telling me that is the only thing worth covering on a daily basis? In fact, by doing it
you're playing
ad infinitum like that, it was actually emboldening and inspiring his base. You know?
That they take to
somebody struggling over 3 jobs, right? To survive, may be outraged that a racist like Trump could get elected president. But he's probably not as outraged if you rank the things that are very, in terms of what are the most important things to that person. To that multi-million-dollar paid anchor, maybe the most important thing is to prevent Trump from winning, right? So that's in their mind.
Yeah.
But to the person juggling 3 jobs, much more important is how to survive. Where is the next check going to come from? You see? And you can only hear this kind of critique, my brother, coming from people like us who are actually part of the working class. No, it's true. We are not paid millions of dollars.
True.
And we're not cut off from what working people are thinking about. Was Trump the number one thing in my mind? Probably not. Should he never, ever come back as president of the United States again? Of course, I would prefer that. But is that the only thing to be covering on a daily basis? The answer is no. Not to people that are juggling just to survive, you know? And if they don't get it, which I think they won't get it, you'll see that type of media declining, which is unfortunate, because they will surrender their territory to a media outlet like Fox News.
And then it's done.
They don't pretend, you know? The working people, including the European working class, they've been hijacked, not because Republicans are the party of the working class. They've been hijacked by Fox News. But Fox News allows them to express their rage and anger
unfiltered
at blacks and Latinos as immigrants, you know, get that anger out. So they come to Fox News. So it becomes their family. Even though Rupert Murdoch, the owner of Fox News, is the most anti-working people person in the world, anti-union, you know?
Anti-immigrant, and he's an
anti-immigrant, anti-everything, anti-immigrant except when it's him. He's Australian. Anti-immigrant, second same. He's Australian, but you know, he's free to come and go in Britain, free to come and go in the United States, you see? We are the ones being manipulated. And for anybody who have spoken about this many times on this show, if you have not seen it yet, go back and listen to the lecture, Race and Class in Guyanese Politics by Walter Rodney. And you see how he analyzed that and why that analysis is so powerful, which he made in 1978, I believe, when he gave a lecture at Columbia University. How the ruling elite manipulate Indian Guyanese and African Guyanese. It kept them fighting, right? Now we have the ruling elite, same MO.
In the United States?
In the United States, in Mayotte, fighting against Comoros, fellow Africans, all impoverished. Oh, I'm a bit well off than you right? You know, you have $10, well, I have 15. Unbelievable.
Yes, let's go to the next story. I mean, you see a following trend as well in the next story. So we go to Burkina Faso. I'll come back onto the mainland, and it reads, Burkina Faso releases 4 French nationals after Morocco intervenes. 4 French nationals were released after a year in detention in Burkina Faso on Thursday. Relations between France and Burkina Faso deteriorated considerably after Ibrahim Traoré came to power through a coup d'etat in 2022. Paris thanked Morocco for its mediation in the case. 4 French nationals held in Burkina Faso for over a year on espionage accusations have been released. France Foreign Intelligence Service said Thursday, with France thanking Morocco for its mediation in the case. The Director General for the External Security, DGSE, told AFP that the 4 had been freed, confirming reports in the media. It gives no further details. On Wednesday, French President Emmanuel Macron spoke with Morocco's King Mohammed V to thank him warmly for the successful mediation that made possible the release of 4 of our compatriots, the LEC said. The 4 men were arrested in Burkina Faso, capital of Ouagadougou, on December 1st, 2023, and presented by the authorities as DGSE agents. A French diplomatic source had indicated they were 4 civilian servants, holders of diplomatic passports and visa, but rejected the accusation that these technicians were sent to Burkina Faso for reasons other than their computer maintenance work. One final part. The mediation by King Morocco comes at a time when Paris and Rabat are warming relations that have been cooled in the past, helped by Macron's state visit at the end of October. Macron notably delighted his Moroccan host by renewing French support for Moroccan sovereignty over the disputed territory of Western Sahara, Western Sahara, a former Spanish colony, is de facto controlled for the most part by Morocco. Your thoughts? Because you can see another neocolonial.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, this one is pure propaganda. And they revealed it. There's one part where they describe the Sahrawi as separatists, you know? So this clearly was a press release that was then edited into a news article, but they forgot to correct one part, that reference to the Sahrawi as separatists. How can you be separatist in your own country? It's like referring to the ANC when they were fighting apartheid as separatists. Or the Frelimo in Mozambique as separatists. Or the MPLA in Angola
separatist
as separatists.
Yeah.
Or the Patriotic Front in Zimbabwe as separatists.
Yeah.
So that sentence to me just exposed the entire article, you know.
Okay. How about the issue of the spies?
Sorry?
The civil servants.
The civil servants, absolutely. Of course, spies are civil servants. You know, they're in the civil service category. CIA, civil service. FBI, civil service.
MI6.
So the French, yeah, absolutely. MI6, MI5, civil service. You know, you notice there's nothing saying, there's not even a quote saying that's outrageous. These are not spies. It said something like they were not doing anything other than the computer maintenance work, right? That could be true, and the computer could be for spying.
No, for me, the part that jumped out to me there was the fact that you first of all said they're not spies. So why is it the director general of that agency is talking?
Absolutely.
Why is it they're refuting the fact that they're spies?
You know, no country that I know of has ever come out officially to say, yes, they captured a few of our spies and we're working very hard to get them back. You know? They said something like, I think they said something like they were on diplomatic passports. Would you expect a spy not to be on a diplomatic passport? People know that in every embassy, all the diplomats have diplomatic passport. And everybody knows that in every embassy, there's a percentage of spies.
Of course.
Right? Other countries just have a higher percentage than other countries. And depending on which country it is that you're based.
Pretty straightforward.
So the Russian diplomatic staff in the United States,
it is a safe bet.
We know a good number of them are spies, and vice versa. You know, in the U.S. Diplomats in Russia, same thing. Same thing with China, right? You know, and a higher proportion. It will probably not be as high, depending on the country that you are looking at a diplomatic relationship with, right?
True. It would be
so
safe.
In Burkina Faso, since Burkina Faso has this contentious relationship right now with France, it is part of the alliance of the Sahel. It would be malpractice, in fact, if the French did not have spies in Burkina Faso, right? And vice versa. I expect that Burkina Faso, even with limited resources, should have some spies in France as well.
That would be the case.
Otherwise, that would be a malpractice as well.
That would be sleeping on the job. So, how do you factor in the fact that Morocco got this civil servants, in inverted commas, free?
Oh, of course, Morocco wants to deepen its relationship with France and aggravate Algeria, which supports the Sahrawis' independence.
Yep.
So that's brownie points for Morocco, you know.
Okay.
It's good diplomatic strategy for Morocco.
So now, speaking to speaking to the Moroccan stance with regards to claiming the Western Sahara, are they not also then playing the role of a colonialist post-colonial Africa?
Who, Morocco?
Yeah, Morocco. Yeah.
Yeah, but clearly they're occupiers illegally of the Sahara. And I commend Algeria for being steadfast, because of course Algeria comes from the tradition of FNL. They remember they fought a war of liberation against France, and they're not about to abandon the people of the Sahara, you know.
And talk about brotherhood. Yeah,
and you know, in fact, somebody had asked me the impact of Trump's election on Africa. And my own position was that on many parts of Africa, he cannot really make things worse than how things were under the Democrats, right? When we look at Congo, when we look at Cameroon, when we look at Sudan, when we look at South Sudan, we look at all these regions, you know, I don't think Trump can make it any worse. But with respect to the Sahara, he might actually be able to accomplish that because of, you know, they were having a tight relationship with Morocco. If that happens, then Morocco could take advantage of that, you know, to further reinforce its positions in the Sahrawi Republic.
So it's one to keep an eye on.
Right.
Yeah, but considering the fact that he's known to be a nativist and really doesn't want to meddle.
Yeah, but he likes money too, you see. And Morocco, you know, he likes money. That's why he likes the Saudis, you know. Remember he said, oh, they bought all these Boeing jets, you know. And I think his son-in-law has a lot of business dealings, you know, in Saudi
Arabia,
in the Gulf states,
in
Israel, and through Israel, you know. I can see the connection to Morocco. So I can see Morocco scoring some points there. But, you know, he has 4 years in office, you see. A lot of people were mourning as if this was the end of the world, that Trump was elected. In fact, that should be a wake-up for people that have not been organizing, that you have to get your act together.
Yeah.
You know.
Time to organize is actually now. Is now.
You're your own best protector, you know.
So, speaking of organizing, it seems as if Ethiopia is finally organizing its affairs with Somalia with the helps of the Turks. And we go to our final story of the day, which is Ethiopia, and comes from your favorite magazine, The Economist. So it reads, Ethiopia and Somalia claims to have settled a dangerous feud. There are reasons.
I love the headline. Claim to have settled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So not that
because normally when people have a meeting like that, things are signed, and you say, oh, settled, right? But there are many
holes.
Yeah, many holes, many untied loose ends. So I don't blame them for that headline. The headline is actually correct, you know.
Because this is it's been an ongoing issue from post
and here's the problem.
Go on.
Yeah, but go ahead. You know, so listeners can know the substance first.
So
and then I'll take it back.
So Ethiopia and Somalia claim to have settled a dangerous feud, but are reasons to be skeptical. And it goes in. For months, a spat between Somalia and Ethiopia has been creeping towards a crisis. In June, Somalia threatened to expel all Ethiopian troops from its territory, where they have long spearheaded the regional fight against Al-Shabaab, a jihadist group. By October, Somalia had formed a military alliance with Egypt and Eritrea, Ethiopia's bitterest foes, as Ethiopia's army chief mused openly about arming groups hostile to the Somalian government. Many feared the tensions could set off proxy wars and draw in other powers in the vicinity, or create a security vacuum in Somalia that Al-Shabaab might exploit. So you want to come in here first?
Yeah, I mean, it's sad. I beg you, read a little more.
Okay. So perhaps they need not have worried. In a surprise announcement on December 11th, Ethiopia and Somalia appear to have made up. After negotiation in Ankara, brokered by Turkey, a joint declaration was signed by Abiy Ahmed, Ethiopia's prime minister, and Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, Somalia's president, agreeing to leave behind differences and contentious issues. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Turkey's prime president, called it a historical reconciliation, but there are reasons to be skeptical. At the heart of the crisis is a memorandum of understanding signed on January 1st between Ethiopia and Somaliland, a self-governing statelet in northern Somalia. Under that agreement, Ethiopia had offered to become the first country to recognize the breakaway republic in return for a long lease of strip off its coastline. This enraged Somalia, which considers Somaliland a renegade province and thus regarded the Memorandum of Understanding as a violation of its territory.
Okay, very good. So at the end of the day, I guess Ethiopia actually does deserve an outlet to the sea, you see? And that brings us back to pretty much the first story.
Yeah.
Where I said they need to revisit this borderless Africa concept.
Yeah.
It's becoming much more pressing, much more desirable, you know, as all these countries face economic, crises. Population is growing. Economy is not growing at the rate to keep up with the population, which means they have what they call negative growth, right? Retrogression. So obviously they want an outlet to sea so that they can increase their import, export, trade, and whatever else you can do with the sea. You can even lease it out, parts of it, if you own it, right?
True.
And then, of course, historically, they had actually had an outlet to the sea.
Through Eritrea.
Absolutely. And Eritrea is an independent country since 1991. And that outlet is no longer available, you see? And that is why it had gone to Somaliland and made this agreement. And Somalia is saying that's literally, like an invasion of our country. Because we consider them a breakaway part of our country. It's a province. And as you know, yes, it, had been a part after independence when the three, Somalia had been literally cut up like a cake, like the rest of the continent. But particularly one people that have, like a common culture, language, religion, history, really, had been split by the French, by the English, and by the Italians.
Yeah.
But after independence, they all came back, they came together and they formed, Somalia. So now because of the civil war that's been raging since Siad Barre was overthrown, which was also in the early 90s, eventually one part self-declared that they are now Somaliland Republic, and they've not been recognized by anybody. And Ethiopia was making it tempting by saying, if you give us outlet to the sea, we will be the first to recognize it. And of course, Somalia is alarmed because that could set, once it sets a precedent, then there could be a second country recognizing Somaliland. then eventually the possibility of reconciliation would be impossible. And we would not be having this conversation if the entire continent was fast tracking toward a borderless Africa, right?
True.
Because then there would be no dispute between Somaliland, Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, right? And so on and so forth.
Now, in bringing up this quest, I pose the question to myself, and I'll pose it to you. What does Ethiopia's quest for maritime access say about the geopolitics of landlocked nations in Africa? There are 16 of them at the moment.
No, it's frustrating. Think about it. I mean, look at Uganda. Uganda, you know, where I hail from, landlocked. You know, Rwanda, landlocked. Burundi, landlocked. So all of these depend on a passageway through Kenya to the port of Mombasa for essentially for all their trade. Because most trade still come through shipping containers, right? Through the sea. And, you know, remember when Uganda under Amin, who was very bellicose, many times are threatened to invade Kenya in order to have access to the coast, you see? Yeah, so it's a problem. It's a problem that would be eliminated if we have a United States of Africa, which would eliminate many, many other problems that the African continent suffers from, you know?
Yes. We could go on, but again, we've come to the end of another interesting episode. But we have something in the pipeline for you going into next year. We're thinking, I mean, you could drop it in the comment section. We're thinking of doing a book once every month, and it will be the tail end of the month. So it will be the last episode of each month. We would showcase a book or give you the heads up about what book it is so that you can also contribute in the chat. So it's a way of sort of engaging, giving context to some of these news stories that we're reading about. That way you understand that there is a rhyme and reason to some of this quote unquote neocolonial writings that we experience on a week by week basis. So the first book would be The Groundings with My Brothers. So we'll be doing that the tail end of January. So the last Sunday of January, we'll be looking at The Grounding with My Brothers. It's, as Comrade Milton said, it's a reasonably short book, and we should be able to cover the nitty-gritty of said book and tie it to what we've been doing.
And it's by Walter Rodney.
And it's by Walter Rodney, yeah. The book is Groundings with My Brothers and by Walter Rodney. So, and yes, that is us going into the new year. Hopefully you've enjoyed yourself this year with regards to what we do here. And we thank you for your support. We've been able to get to 1,000. Now the look is to get ourselves to the next 1,000 and the next 1,000. So each one bring one. And more importantly, if this is your first time of coming here, do like, share, and subscribe to the channel. You can also download the audio version on your favorite podcast platforms first thing Monday morning. So you can listen to it while you go to work or you do your morning chores. And yes, Brother Milton.
Asante Nisana. Happy New Year. Productive, prosperous New Year for all our audience. And I wish all of you good health. Kwaherini.
And from me, I would say Ekudede Woyi, as we will say in Yoruba, which means good tidings of this time, and hopefully have a happy new and prosperous new year. And we'll see you in the new year. And once again, it's good night and God bless.
Yay.
Yes.
I think I'm all set, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right.
Thank
So
you
let me
very
run
much.
to brunch, man. I'm starving, man. Let me run.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Asante sana.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you.